Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy you could join us today, and we've got some wonderful contributors lined up to share their take on current events around the world. We want to start today by introducing you to Benita Ezumezu. She is checking in with us from Nigeria. And Benita, first of all, congratulations and welcome to the Young Voices contributors team. Would you tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
All right. Good. Hello. It's evening right here. My name is Benita Ezumezu. I'm from Nigeria, and it is past 6. It is 6:05 currently in Nigeria. And I currently work with Citizens Common Advocacy International. And what is Citizens Common? Citizens Common is a nonprofit that is committed to empowering everyday citizens to taking social action targeted at solving big and small problems. It doesn't matter how little, but we are just committed to empowering citizens to take that action. And we also collaborate with, we focus on innovation, collaboration, and technology. I also manage the Impact Central Social Innovation Hub. It is the only social innovation hub in Abuja, Nigeria. I manage it. I'm also a researcher. I'm a writer. I focus in technology, public policy, and human rights. And then I'm a contributor for Young Voices. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Wonderful. And we have a terrific article that you have written about how technology can address gender inequality in Africa. Benita, before we begin on the article, though, I'd like you to help me understand. The information age has changed things so much just within my own lifetime here in America. Tell me a little bit about how the information age has affected Africa. What kind of changes have you seen because of technology?
Okay, I would say thank you very much for that question. I would say I've seen a lot of changes in Africa. You could see how people are now more interested in technology because of what it has done. It has, it has contributed to the growth of the economy. It has contributed to the growth of Africa. It has increased collaboration. It has increased partnership. It has also advanced opportunities for women. It has increased economic progress, and there are so many benefits that that technology has improved in Africa. You know, from the skills that a lot of Africans have been able to learn, we can notice that through these skills, it has benefited women towards tech, and also towards improving their, improving our self-confidence. A lot of times people don't have the confidence because they feel like, tech is for men, and tech is, most men are, they easily assimilate or learn faster than women. And then, so because of that, they feel like they are not good enough, and they don't have the knowledge or the capacity to actually understand it because they feel it is very technical. So, the few people that have been able to come out to learn, to go into tech, have been able to, mentor these new females that are scared to go into tech as a result because of the fear, like, it's too difficult. But these few women that have gone into tech, I would take a cue from Ife Olua from Toronto. She built the health tracker. She initially, from her story, she was scared, like, how go into this very difficult. And then she discovered that right there in Canada, is the health systems is not very easy. So what about Africa that has a lot to do? She needed to do something, and then she did it, and she went out, and then she told a lot of people about it, and she made it known to people that tech is not just for men. Female can also venture in tech and also improve. It can also improve. I would say self-confidence in females. And then I would also say that for women, I know that tackling gender gap has been able to boost our global GDP. So according to my McKinsey Global Institute, by 2025, if we're able to currently tackle the current gender gap, we'll be able to boost our global GDP by 12 million. And wow. I'm sure that African leaders have seen that the support and the constant mentorship and the trainings and the opportunities that have been made accessible to females have been able to increase technology, has been able to increase access to, technology has a lot of things, and then we notice that a lot of it's not being maximized. We're not maximizing the entire process, because we have a lot of work to do in tech, but we have limited manpower, limited human power, because we're focusing on male. But now that leaders have seen that even females can even use this tech to even monitor gender-based violence online. They could create apps that could monitor gender-based violence. They could also create apps that could, speak to women to understand exactly what we are facing. If you're making policy and you're making it's not going to be very clear. So when you get policies to understand exactly how, you feel like, okay, this can work. She's a woman. She's better understanding of how a woman feels, of how she feels not smart. Basically, in Africa, most African women, we feel like, oh, we have a lot to do, and then we feel not smart. We feel like we don't have the competencies. We feel like we're not competent. But the fact that lots of programs have been put in place, it has increased the capacity, the number of women in tech. And I would say, yes, I think tech has really improved with the gap that has taken in place with the trainings and opportunities for females. Thank you very much.
Benita, tell me about gender inequality. Even before technology started opening these new doors, there was gender inequality that was perhaps part of the culture in some places. Tell me about how that has affected opportunities for women today, and how can that those cultural beliefs be overcome to open the door to greater gender equality?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So I would start by saying that it's a background cultural belief. There's this belief that females have little to contribute to a society because they're supposed to be, especially in Africa. There's this belief that females have little to contribute, so they would rather take instructions from the males. And they don't have a lot of things to contribute. And, this has really caused a lot of, this actually killed the self-confidence of women. They feel like they should be able to take instruction and from the male counterparts. So I think that a lot of times what we focus on in Africa is the fact that females are not being considered opportunities. They don't have equal opportunities to, as a male. In Africa, you would see, I wouldn't really say in Africa, I think it's in a lot of places, it's global. We hear people talk about how there is disparity in the workplace, there is gender imbalances in environment, in the society, in schools, and then you see have better opportunities to access. You see, okay, recently I know that something happened, and then because a woman has a better qualification than a man, but because she's a lady, she is not considered as competent as a man. And then all of those things come into play, and then because as a result of that, that are really considered in Africa, and then but the fact that women have been able to stand up and be able to speak for themselves, to understand that they could do this the same thing that these men do. They could do it, and then they could do it. And when women put a lot of mind, they put their mind into something, they do it very well. They do it very well. So they've been able to understand that when women speak up, they're able to support others to speak up. I mean, it's been able to contribute to the gender gap and probably help close it. Yes. Or I know that technology is how do I it's with technology, it's easier for women to be able to go online and say exactly how they feel about certain situations and how it can be addressed. because it's coming from a woman, and how I suppose it gets a place for other women to also, understand, and also, I think that's it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, we are talking with Benita Ezumezu. She is a Young Voices contributor and also an African Liberty Writing Fellow. And Benita, I'm sure that there are people who would like to follow your work. Where can they find your articles? Where would they find them published?
Okay, I have a few articles on the Youth Action platform. Then you can look on LinkedIn, Benita Ezumezu on LinkedIn, and then I have a few other articles on Whispers.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being my guest. I hope we get to talk again soon.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your show.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are happy to welcome Donald Kimball to the show. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Donald, take just a minute here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, would you please?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. My name is Donald Kimball. I work for Washington Policy Center. We are a nonprofit think tank based in Washington State, and we take a look at the issues involving Washington State, mostly fiscal policy type things, ways we can help make the state a better place to live. And I've been with WPC for a number of years now, and it's been a pleasure. They're a great organization.
Well, I'm glad to get to meet you. I'm from your neighboring state of Idaho, and so I pay close attention to what happens next door.
We look on jealously of you often.
So your article about Governor Inslee lied about the cost of the carbon cap and trade program. This one hit home because I'm feeling pain every time I go to fill up my car. Talk to me a little bit about what the carbon cap and trade program is. On what basis was it sold to the public?
Yeah, so the background on this is pretty interesting because I want to say it was in 2018, it may have been around then, there was an initiative to the voters in order to try to pass some kind of a carbon tax. And this was rejected by the voters. They did not want to pay more for things like gasoline. And so in 2021, the legislature decided to ignore the will of the voters and pass one anyway, just through legislative means instead of through the will of the people by a vote. And so then the program wasn't set to actually sort of take effect until January 1 of this year. And what the program does is it follows California's footstep of their kind of cap and trade system, where you put a cap on the number of carbon emissions that can be output by Washington State. And then there are auctions that allow you to buy these credits for allowing individual companies to output certain emissions. There's a joke that any bad policy California puts in place, Washington is 10 years behind. And it seems we have done kind of the same thing here. So because of this, the goal of this policy is to reduce the number of emissions by this cap. And when you reduce the number of emissions that you're going to create, you necessarily increase the cost. So this is kind of the goal of the policy from the beginning. And so it was very weird when, leading up to the implementation of this, we ran some calculations. We said, okay, this program is going to cost about 45 cents were our projections. And then we started hearing denials from government officials and advocacy groups about it having an impact, which was very odd.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right. Look, it's a classic case of, okay, we want to discourage, for instance, consumption of fossil fuels, but if you're willing to pay, hey, we'll provide a way for you. And I can't imagine that this does anything but help drive the costs up for those businesses or those sectors of industry that buy the credits. That cost is still going to get passed on to the consumer in the end, isn't it?
Absolutely right. And that's exactly what every person who's advocated for the policy recognized. So when we started hearing claims from the governor specifically, he said this program will have minimal impact. Pennies was his quote. He said, minimal impact, if any, pennies, which, technically speaking, 45 pennies is pennies. It is just a lot of pennies. And it was very confusing to us because the entire point of the bill is to increase the price of gas because you want to make it less desirable. This was not even that controversial. Severin Borenstein was the one of the people who helped create the program for California, and he did the exact same calculation that our researcher Todd Myers did, which, Todd Myers looked in depth, looked at the numbers coming from the Department of Ecology themselves. He looked at those numbers, he ran the calculations based on what we've seen in California and came up with 45 cents. Severin Borenstein, who had created this program in California or helped create it, he did the same thing and said it's beyond controversy that this is going to raise the price. That's the intended effect. An advocacy group called Climate Solutions also said that this was part of the intended effect. But once you get closer to the actual costs being implemented, you see things like Climate Solutions saying it's oil company greed. The Department of Ecology, they went back on their website, which had said that this program would not impact gas prices very much. They erased it. They removed it completely. And you can only find it now by going on the Internet Wayback Machine, pulling it up, saying they're trying to cover their evidence. So at every level, they've tried to sort of have their cake and eat it too, where they say, we're going to save the planet by reducing emissions, by making it more expensive. And then once people see, oh, this is actually going to hurt and cost something, they say, no, that's greedy oil companies. And then they'll lie inside about those stats too, which even happened after this article was written, which was pretty crazy.
Wow. How frustrating. I mean, I guess it's not unexpected, but still, okay, you got one past us. Talk to me about some of the potential solutions because of this. I'm sure the people aren't just going to sit back and, what can we do? Just keep on paying this. What are some of the things that are working in favor of discouraging this kind of behavior on the part of politicians?
Yeah, certainly. I think ultimately we have to keep politicians accountable to these things. It's pretty striking to me that even in Washington state, which is known for being pretty environmentally conscious, even on its voter base, I think it was 2018, voters did reject this kind of a carbon tax. And then politicians went ahead and voted it in anyway and are trying to lie about these costs to say it's not their fault. So I think that the first step is really making people aware, one, that this is the intended result of this policy, two, that the politicians ignored your will, and then three, in a democratic system that we're in, you kind of have to rely on voters to hold politicians accountable. One of the things that we often joke about is, politicians lie all the time and it's just kind of taken for granted. Yep. But when we reward this behavior by reelecting them and letting them grandstand on these environmental claims, then you reward that behavior and you incentivize them to lie when there's no punishment. A columnist for the Seattle Times, who is a supporter of this tax, admitted that raising the cost of gasoline and energy and those kinds of things was the intended effect, but kind of justified it by saying, would we ever have passed this kind of bill if the costs were known? And to me, that's just a very bad way to govern, a deceptive way to govern, to say to people, we can get the good result we want. We just have to deceive everyone about it, and then we'll get that. That's sort of an ends justify the means political theory, which I don't think is great. And what I will say, I want to add in, the ends being justified here aren't even that great. My research partner, well, not my partner, but my coworker, our Center for Environment researcher, Todd Myers, points out that when they are pitching the benefits of this cap and trade program, the emissions being reduced, they don't actually cite how much reduction will happen in Washington state. They look at global numbers. They try to cite things out of like Thailand and, if these kinds of programs get enacted globally, meaning that they won't actually tell you the benefit because it's so small. And when you raise the prices on gasoline, that raises the prices, on carbon emissions specifically, that raises the prices on gasoline, on energy, on food production, all these things that disproportionately hurt lower income and medium income individuals and families. So what's frustrating is that not only are they lying about the program, they're grandstanding on results they won't even tell you about at the opportunity cost of the people who can very least afford it. So it's a frustrating system of them lying, pretending to take credit for something, and then trying to diffuse all the blame onto, again, quote, greedy oil companies, which there's no evidence of that actually being the case.
Man, Donald, that just raised my blood pressure a couple of points hearing about that. And it's because I think of it in these terms. If it's a policy worth having, it's a policy that's worth putting in place with full transparency and not needing to keep things in the dark and manipulate people in order to get it. And I can't think of any other place we would tolerate that kind of behavior, especially in the private sector. Would you do business with a business that you knew was shady, but they're doing it for your own good? I can't. I certainly wouldn't.
That's exactly right.
All right, let's. We're down to about 45 seconds here. is it likely voters are going to enact some safeguards to rein in this kind of behavior, or are they kind of stuck in a pattern and just going to go with the flow as they've done?
It's difficult to predict. We'll see. We hope that there is some kind of, countermeasure to this to help alleviate that. One of the simple ways is, if the legislature wants to help address this, is reducing some of our more regressive taxes, such as cutting our sales tax or even cutting our gas tax, which was already one of the highest in the country. So even if they want to keep this program, which we think should be, drawn back, there are ways that you can help alleviate costs for lower income people, and hopefully voters will pursue some of those options.
Okay, again, we are talking with Donald Kimball. He's a contributor for Young Voices as well as the communications manager at Washington Policy Center. Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me. I have a personal account on Twitter at Kimball Donald. That is a mix of personal and private. So if you like seeing weird, personal anecdotes, maybe some gaming stuff, I'm there. But definitely check out our work at WashingtonPolicy.org. That's where we keep most of our up-to-date news.
Welcome back. This is Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Ryan Bercaw back to the program. Ryan, for some people, this is going to be their first time getting to know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Bercaw, based out of Washington, D.C. I'm a freelance policy nerd that publishes a lot of op-eds on East Asian foreign affairs. I've got about 10 years of total experience with the Department of Defense. I've spent 5 years in the Marines and really into China.
And it's probably a good idea to be paying attention to China. They are definitely an emerging power on the world stage. And, in your article that I'm looking at in International Policy Digest, you talk about how in politics, if you have, if in any form of politics, you got to have a message that's going to carry that policy forward. And you make a pretty strong case here that right now the U.S., in terms of its China policy, doesn't really have a good message dialed in. Where's the disconnect?
Absolutely. So I titled the essay "The Missing Ingredient" because the missing ingredient in Washington's China policy is essentially a compelling message to rally the entire society behind the different lines of effort that we have to counter China. So, give you an example. In the Biden administration's national security, they lay out a pretty straightforward goal. They say we want a free, open, and prosperous international order. You say that to a policy nerd in Washington, and they nod their head immediately. It's intuitive. They go, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. If I go to rural North Carolina where my mom lives and I say that to somebody, they're going to say, what the hell does that have to do with me? and that leaves more questions than answers, because if we're supposed to all be back to the same team here, well, you need to be able to communicate that language to the ordinary Americans that are supposed to be helping carry it out.
So talk to me about Washington's policy towards China. I hear this from various people. Some people seem to take a more suspicious or even sometimes hostile stance. Others say, no, it's Russia that we need to be worried about. Give me your best take in terms of who's moving to fill the vacuum of power, as it were, on the world stage. It seems like China's probably got a lot more going for it than most nations at this point.
It certainly has a number of strengths. I think if I had to summarize America's China policy into 2 words, it would essentially be China bad. There's very few things on both sides of the political spectrum that both parties agree on, but I'd say that's probably one thing where they're in complete lockstep. And also with the American public, right? There was a Pew poll back in April that said 81% of Americans also view China with a high degree of skepticism. So I sort of read that as an opportunity. Well, the American public and their policymakers both seem to be in universal agreement that this is a problem that needs to be addressed.
So what are the kind of priorities that we should have toward China? What are the major sticking points?
So if you look at some of the policies that have been laid out, a lot of these lines of effort really started under the Obama administration, and so we're kind of seeing just a continuation of those. But there's a trade policy, which is probably first and foremost, right? Maintaining that as a stabilizing factor in the relationship. There's a security policy, ensuring that the security situation in East Asia doesn't deteriorate into conflict. That's obviously of prime importance for everyone. And in the recent years, scientific and technological policy has been sort of a new area with AI, 5G, telecommunications. That seems to be emerging among the top priorities now.
Wow. Is it possible sometimes, I'm just wondering because I'm always a little bit suspicious. I think Washington does a good job of looking out for itself. Sometimes I worry, do they overstate, the threat of China or the danger posed by allowing China to have too much influence, either in the economic sector or militarily or whatever? Are there those within the government in whose interest it would be to play up those kinds of things?
I would say humbly that they're right on the money. When you think about advanced technology, right? If you're an occupant of the Western world, right, and you value liberty, freedom, democracy, human rights, and so on, giving an authoritarian superpower that has explicitly labeled themselves as hostile to those values is a very dangerous and precarious situation. And this isn't necessarily a new idea to try and curb them on this front. The Reagan administration implemented similar measures during the Cold War to try and curb, I believe it was Russian oil technology, oil processing technology, and certain types of computer technology as well.
Interesting. Now, I understand that China is making its presence particularly in the Pacific, more well known with man-made islands and so forth. And, I'm not looking at this with any kind of anticipation like, oh boy, here we go. But it seems like there could be a stage being set for conflict in the not too distant future. And I'm curious if that's one of the places where we're likely to see increased friction between the U.S. and China.
I'd say it's anyone's best guess, but to give all due credit to the Biden administration, one of the things that they're focusing very keenly on is trying to ensure that the remaining areas of cooperation between Washington and Beijing remain intact. I definitely see there's at least an attempt to maintain an extended olive. But at the same time, they're also preparing for a protracted conflict, which is where you get the term strategic competition, right? So it seems like Washington's sort of positioning itself to be able to adapt to the Goldilocks scenario where things settle down, or if shit hits the fan.
Wow. So it's how seriously do we take China as far as an economic power? I've heard that they've got the manpower, they've got the factories, people have outsourced a lot of building and so forth there. But talk to me about, does China, without its trade relationship with the U.S., does that significantly diminish their position economically, in the world?
It certainly doesn't help. Just a couple weeks ago, Mexico surpassed China as our largest trade partner. So that's good from an American economic security standpoint. I personally favor maintaining the economic relationship with China just for the sheer sake of having something to compete, right? There's benefits to consumers as well, right? We all like going to Walmart and being able to fill up a shopping cart with cheap toothpaste and deodorant,
So let's bring this home to the idea of, making that message reach the average American who isn't spending time, at the State Department. What's the message that the average American needs to understand per the U.S. government regarding China?
Well, think about it like this, okay? The Chinese Communist Party has made it pretty clear that they view their struggle with the United States as a protracted conflict for, maybe dominance isn't the right word, but for preeminence on the world stage, right? And Beijing's articulated a number of clear policies to organize their entire society behind that goal. So your average Chinese citizen maintains no illusions about what the plan is, right? In the United States, we have nothing close to that. And if we're serious about competing with China for the long term, then we have to be able to match that level of commitment. And that means that each and every single American citizen is a player in this protracted struggle. And so I think it's important, one, for the government to clearly articulate how individual Americans can contribute, and two, in bolstering enthusiasm for Americans to contribute, right? Americans don't need to be lectured about how they should contribute to foreign policy. They need to be sold. They need to be energized.
Well, and that's where I'm trying to make the connection, because, I'm very much of the mindset. Look, as far as the federal government goes, yes, by all means, create those relationships and the commerce with other countries and so forth. But for the most part, I kind of like to be left alone. But what you're saying sounds like maybe I need to be paying a little closer attention. In other words, maybe I shouldn't outsource. The folks at Foggy Bottom will take care of it. And maybe I should be paying a little closer attention myself.
Yeah, if the military taught me one thing, it's that bad news doesn't get better with time.
So what are some good resources for people who want to have a good feel for what's going on between the U.S. and China? I know there's a lot of people out there peddling some straight up fear. For instance, the Chinese are coming. The guy who played Dale Gribble on King of the Hill just passed away this last week. And there was a wonderful picture of him looking at a crack in his neighbor's driveway and going, "That's either a crack in your cement or the Chinese are making their move." And I thought, yeah, there's people who believe that way.
Well, rest in peace, Dale Gribble, for one. Two, I think for any Americans curious about U.S.-China relations, the Council on Foreign Relations maintains a wonderful timeline of U.S.-China relations going all the way, I think it goes all the way back to 1949. It's an excellent resource for keeping appraised of where things have gone, what the current situation is, and maybe even where they're headed.
Okay, and as far as China, are they operating from a position of stability right now?
I think they should like to think that.
Okay. Just wondering. Again, we're talking with Ryan Bercaw. Ryan Bercaw, rather. Tell everybody where they can follow you on social media, where they can follow your writing as well.
You can follow me on LinkedIn. My other published works appear in the Marine Corps Gazette and the International Policy Digest.
All right, Ryan, thank you. Great to catch up with you.
Hey, thank you very much, Brian. Thanks for the opportunity.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, I'm happy to welcome a familiar voice back to the program. That would be Amanda Griffiths. Amanda, you've been on here before, but I'm sure some folks are getting acquainted with you for the first time. Take a moment. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, first of all, it's great to be back with you, Brian. And I am a PhD student, newly transferred from UCLA to UW-Madison. And I am a contributor at Young Voices. I am also, just as of this past week, one of their new social mobility fellows, which is very exciting. It's a wonderful opportunity to write about entrepreneurial freedom, poverty alleviation, consumer choice. And honestly, my article that we're going to talk about today gets at the heart of really all of those things. So I'm very excited to touch base with you and your listeners today.
Yeah, it's, I don't get to Starbucks. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I love the smell. I love the culture. People like to sit and read books and so forth. But I never stop and really think about the workers there. And as I was looking at your article about the National Labor Relations Board is standing in the way of Starbucks workers who are actually seeking relief on a couple of issues, I think, really? you could screw up something that is such a good thing for so many people. Set the stage for us. Tell us, where does the friction start between Starbucks and their employees, and why is the National Labor Relations Board getting mixed up in this?
Sure. So people who have followed Starbucks and who know a little bit about what's going on with them know that Starbucks has had to face some pretty serious questions and allegations, in some regards have actually been found liable for unfair labor practices as a national corporation. They've been accused of bargaining in bad faith with Workers United, again, nationally. There are several Starbucks stores where workers have unionized in the early stages with Starbucks Workers United. Workers United is a service industry conglomerate, one of these mega unions, big labor unions that we talk about sometimes, represent a lot of different industries, very hard to represent the discrete needs of the individual worker. But the way that this works is that if a union has been authorized to act as a group's bargaining representative for over a year without reaching a first contract, the workers have a stopgap measure. They don't like the way that things are going. They can say, you know what, we want to decertify this union. Maybe we want to bargain ourselves. We want to represent ourselves. Maybe we just want to unionize with a different affiliate. And that's when you have a decertification election, theoretically. This is a very democratic process, bulwark of workplace democracy, where the workers put to a vote among themselves, do we want to decertify, in this case, Workers United? Do we want to keep the union on? But here's the rub. The unions can now file what are called blocking charges if they don't want the workers to file a decertification petition or decertify them, which you wouldn't as a business, and unions are businesses. You wouldn't want to lose really you wouldn't want to lose the people who are paying you. And that's what Workers United has done. That then kicks the decision to local National Labor Relations Board bureaucrats, takes the decision out of workers' hands, and the NLRB can nix that petition at any time. Workers don't get to vote. NLRB says, nope, we don't want you to. We think that it's bad for you to not have this particular union. The union has filed blocking charges, and we agree with the union. So ostensibly, they have to have cause. The cause to which the NLRB is pointing is saying, well, Starbucks is engaging in union breaking tactics. So as a national corporation, maybe they're doing this, they're forcing the workers to file these petitions. Okay, but if Starbucks is in the wrong for denying workers agency, and by the way, they don't know this, but if Starbucks is in the wrong for denying workers the agency to choose their preferred method of bargaining, why would the NLRB and Workers United be in the right for doing the exact same thing?
Why does it always end up in some bureaucrat's hands? I mean, it seems like problems are best solved at the lowest possible level, and for some reason, I mean, what was the justification for getting the National Labor Relations Board involved in the first place?
This is a really in-the-weeds series of policy changes or micro revisions that have taken place with the Biden administration. Some of these policies have been on the books for a very long time. Others have sort of been tweaked slightly. But the upshot is that the NLRB now has an unprecedented amount of power. And it's a power to deny workers their rights. It's being used right now as a weapon against the right to work. It's being used contrary to the ostensible, on paper, intentions of the NLRB, of labor policy, and of unions' rhetoric.
Hey, for those, and this is for my own edification as well here, right to work. I think I know what that means, but would you mind defining that for me so I can make sure that I'm actually on the same page here as to what it actually means?
Sure. Very, very broad terms. And I'm sure you're going to get a bunch of lawyers who are cringing because this is not a granular definition at all. But in general, you can think of right to work as saying you don't have to join a union. You don't have to be unionized to be part of this particular industry. You think of schools. You don't have to be, if you have the right to work, or if you're in a right to work state, you don't have to be unionized in order to join a particular industry.
Okay, so some states, I guess, if it's not a right to work state, there are states that you do have to actually join a union to work within a particular vocation or something. In
certain sectors, and again, this is a very, very broad level definition. So again, I'm using this phrase "right to work" as a catch-all term, but yes, right to work would generally be the concept that you can represent yourself. You can have whatever form of representation. You can be an independent contractor. You do not have to be really signed with anyone in order to make a living.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. I have walked around for years hoping that I understood that. And I wasn't too far off, but you've given me some good direction. Let's bring it back to Starbucks. So the employees at Starbucks, they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. To whom can they turn for some kind of relief?
Well, you would think that they would be able to turn, if anything, you'd want them to be able to turn to agencies. Honestly, this is where it would be nice to have a sector of the government, in fact, that was not captured by by labor unions, by the people that they are supposed to be monitoring. I mean, the NLRB, yes, they should be looking at corporations and corporations' tactics, but they should also be looking at unions' tactics. Workers, honestly, this was supposed to be their out. They were supposed to be able to have this stopgap measure, this decertification petition, this decertification election. And right now, that is getting torn apart. That is getting hamstrung. So what needs to happen is we just need to revise these policies, make it so that, the NLRB is either huge. They can walk and chew gum at the same time. And they've been looking at these allegations about Starbucks. They have been monitoring them. It stands to reason that they could go about doing that exact same thing. Let workers have their decertification elections. Let workers file for decertification. There are many, many Starbucks locations where workers have done this. This is not an isolated event. So we're seeing a pattern. And right now, there have been 2 decertification petitions that have been killed. A very, very small number, I think, remains standing for this year for Starbucks. What needs to happen is we need to allow the workers, the agency, to decertify or at least hold elections. The NLRB can then look into these labor tactics that Starbucks is accused of violating, or these labor laws, rather. Interesting.
Well, and as far as the average consumer, I guess, do they continue to support their Starbucks, or do they need to apply a little economic pressure?
Well, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do with me, where they take their money and buy their coffee.
Maybe tip a little more generously when they're picking up their order.
There we go. Drink your conscience. Vote your conscience and drink your conscience.
Okay, I like it. Again, we're talking with Amanda Griffiths. She is a Young Voices contributor. And Amanda, I know you're very present on social media. I follow you on Twitter. For those who would like to do likewise, how can they find you?
Yes, you can find me at Ajax the Griff on Twitter. I suppose it's X now. Is it X now? Yeah.
Yeah, I still call it Twitter.
You can also go to my page on Young Voices and see all of my recent hits, my recent articles, and media appearances.
All right, very good. Great to catch up with you once again.
Wonderful to talk with you, Brian. Thanks so much.